welcome back to another Polytalks video, and today we'll be discussing a very timely event, which is the collapse of the Silicon Valley Bank, or SVB. Now, this headline has been all the rage recently in the news, but there's still a lot of ambiguity surrounding it, so I'm going to be explaining today what the SVB is, why it collapsed, and what that reveals about kind of the broader political scene within the United States. Because as we know, the economy and politics and culture, that kind of triplet, they're all very correlated to each other. And so analyzing this event can tell us more about politics as a whole. So, in case you didn't know, the Silicon Valley Bank it's not a massive, more famous bank, but many tech and investment companies and startups had significant amounts of funds invested within this bank, and so had, of course, a significant stake. However, when the Federal Reserve raised interest rates in an attempt to curb inflation, the value of the US Treasury bonds, which this bank had invested in, decreased because if you have an older bond at a lower rate, a fixed rate bond, then you need to have some sort of sweetener in the deal, or else there's no reason to buy it, as opposed to a high interest bond of the same value, because you get less interest payment towards the investor. So what that meant is the value of the bonds went down. Now this is temporary, so this bank could have waited until interest rates went down again, although of course that's an uncertainty, or they could have waited until the bond matured and they got that principal back. But this led to a temporary panic and a bank run where essentially the Silicon Valley Bank told their investors and when that happened, they panicked, and many customers rapidly took money out of the bank expecting it to go down, and ironically, that only worsened the situation and resulted in the bank's collapse. And this bank is no longer standing, and it's fallen down as a result of this mass panic and bank scare. Now, there are plans being discussed. This is still an ongoing event, so some of these companies might get lucky. They might get bailed out by Wall Street. However, this is a major problem for them, an issue, because they only have $250,000 of funds insured out of the potentially millions in this bank. So now we've kind of reviewed a high-level sense of why this bank collapsed, and now we're going to be discussing the political reactions to it, which is, of course, the juice and meat of this event. So we can see here, just based on these headlines, lawmakers slam regulators following Silicon Bank failure. Silicon Valley Bank hearing takeaways, a blame game but few solutions, and U.S. regulator cites terrible risk management for Silicon Valley Bank failure. So it doesn't take a genius to identify that all three of these headlines display kind of a blame game or partisan attacking based on lawmakers, regulators, and that I find that significant because even in the midst of a major event like this, the collapse of a bank does not drive cooperation. In fact, it does the opposite. It drives attacking and infighting and partisanship. And that is very revealing of the modern political culture today, and not just for this event, for anything such as mass shootings, abortion legislation. We see whenever there's a major event like this, the parties involved, their first instinct is to verbally attack each other based on the other's failures. And that is very revealing of the modern political sense, because we live in an environment where every event that happens, regardless whether it be economic, social, cultural, there is always a political reaction to it, and it's always driven by partisan factors. And that may never have used to been the case. I think in the olden days, we had a more cooperative culture where there would be cooperation following an event like this. And there is, don't get me wrong, but certainly not in Congress and with regulators. There, it is simply a blame game, and there are few solutions being proposed to bail out other banks as well. So this is a massive kind of issue in today's political scene, and I wanted to draw attention to it because it is kind of a characteristic of how, in this, especially in the United States, we have this climate where any event motivates a political and partisan response driven by competition. And I will let you decide whether or not that is a beneficial culture, but is simply something to draw attention to as we analyze events in the future about kind of this culture we have and why maybe dysfunction and gridlock are more common today than they were many years ago. So, thank you for this short and sweet. Thank you for listening to the short and sweet analysis where I explore the collapse of this bank and its ramifications. I hope to be seeing you very soon, and that concludes today's video. Thank you very much, and see you in the future.